Good evening, everybody. Great to see you. Thanks very much for coming. I want to share some thoughts with you as quickly as I can, so we've got some time for questions at the end as we think about this subject, growing leaders. And I want to start with this slide, which says team building. Sometimes the most important lesson you can learn is that you're not in a very good team. And so hopefully there's no one here this evening who feels like I am not in a very good team. But hopefully, even if you feel that your team isn't as great as you want it to be, then some of the ideas that I'm going to share with you will help in that. And we've been on this journey within our own church actually in the last few months, not just in terms of youth and children's ministry, but thinking about when people step up into leadership, what does that mean? What are we looking for in them? How are we going to cultivate them as leaders and grow them as leaders? And so some of the stuff I'm presenting you is stuff that literally we've been wrestling with in the last two or 3 months. And so the first thing that I want to say is this, that when it comes to leadership, the first thing that we're always looking for is character. Leadership ultimately is an issue of heart. We're looking for people who are servant-hearted. I'm always impressed when kind of people show up and they're the first to put the chairs away or to clean the floor or just to serve. And so when we've got radar for leaders, we're looking for people who have that servant-heartedness. And in the context of growing people, obviously one of the most important character traits we're looking for is humility and teachability. Is this someone that is willing to take challenge, is willing to be held accountable, is willing to both be affirmed, but actually that you can come alongside them and say, look, that was great, but that wasn't so great. How can we improve? And they'll receive that and they'll take that they're willing to learn. And so the first thing always before anyone gets into position that we want to be thinking about is character. Are they teachable? Is there a servant-heartedness? Are they humble? Are they honest? Are they real? Because if that stuff's not in place, you can't grow someone who ultimately doesn't want to be grown. So that's the first thing. Secondly, and you'll see that all of these begin with the letter C. It's the preacher in me, forgive me. Secondly, leaders are carriers. You might remember the story of the Exodus of Moses to Egypt when Moses reaches this crisis point where he basically says to God, these people are too heavy. I can't carry them anymore. And he's not talking about their collective weight is too much, but basically the vision that God has given him to carry 1 million people from Egypt into the promised land. He says, this vision is too big. And so God says, okay, pick 70 other leaders and I will anoint those 70 other leaders who will carry the vision with you so that you don't carry it by yourself. And so I think there's a big difference between someone who comes along to our program who just wants to help, and we need helpers, we need people who will make drinks and that kind of thing, but leaders carry vision. They carry it with you. They carry the burden of it with you. The vision of what you're trying to do in young people's lives, the vision of what you're trying to do in children's lives, the direction of travel, that you're not a lone ranger, that you really feel like, even if it's 1 or 2 people who have got your back, that they're in this with you. And so leaders are people of character, and secondly, they're carriers. It's what makes them leaders. Thirdly, that they have chemistry. And if you're into science, this has nothing to do with science because I failed science miserably at school, got a D, so we don't speak about it. But I'm talking about chemistry with people, the ability to get on well with people. A few years ago, I wrote a leadership course for young people called Kinetic. You can get it available from Urban Saints, a little plug there. And when I co-wrote Kinetic with this lady Sharon Pryor, we gave it to this other lady called Jill Garrett, who's a national leadership guru, phenomenal leader. And when Jill's main piece of feedback to us was about saying that this course did not convey enough how important it was for a leader to be able to relate really well to people. And that unless you have and are developing and committed to developing leadership people skills, the ability to listen to people, the ability to enter their world, the ability to influence people, the ability to come alongside them, then you might be leading, but if no one's following, you're just going for a walk, basically. And so if we're picking people that we want to grow, they've got to be people who are committed to be people, who can relate to others. This is a good challenge for me. I'm a very task-oriented person. And, you can get task-oriented leaders who have their checklists of things. I don't know what you're like. I'm going to do this and this and this and this. Where you've got some people who don't really care about the task because they just love spending time with people. And actually, we need both of those things. Yes, we need to achieve some goals. But actually, ultimately, your ability to influence someone as a leader and for your other leaders to influence will depend on how relational they are and how much they're willing to invest in relationships. And that takes a long time. So leaders with chemistry. Next. Is it fourthly? Yeah, I think fourthly, isn't it? Leaders with competence. So here we're talking about the fact that we recognize that everyone has different skills, everyone has different talents. There are some people who are really good up front telling stories. There are people who are good at running games. There are people who are good at organizing. Everyone has different gifts and abilities. Some people are more pastoral. The scriptures tell us that some people are teachers and pastors and prophets and evangelists and have gifts of hospitality and care and this whole range of gifts. And so when we position people in leadership roles, we want to position them not generically, but in accordance with their competence, with their skill, the way that God has wired them, the way that God has made them. Some years ago, the international research organization Gallup did a massive piece of research, millions of hours of research, to look at what makes a great manager. And this is what they came up with as the wisdom of great managers. Wisdom of great managers is this, related to people. People don't change much. Don't waste time trying to put in what was left out. Try to draw out what was left in, because that's hard enough. Now, the essence of this is saying the way we grow people is we invest in their strengths. We identify what they're really good at, and that's what we fan into flame. Now, before I worked for Urban Saints, I worked for T-Mobile for 10 years. And any of you, if you work in a commercial company and you have had the joys of the annual appraisal, will know that most of the time, unless your own organization start to embrace this stuff, you have your annual appraisal, and your annual appraisal looks at the things that you've done well, and it looks at the things that you've done badly, and the emphasis of your training then is to fix your weaknesses, isn't it? You're not very good at speaking up front, so we'll send you on a upfront speaking skills, or you're not very good at PowerPoint, we'll send you on a PowerPoint skills, and the focus of energy is where you're not good. And the wisdom of this brilliant book, First Break All the Rules, which is not a Christian book, but actually all truth is God's truth, and I think this is right, is that basically that's a waste of time. The way you grow people is you identify what they're really, really good at, and then you do all that you can to fan that into flame, and you manage around their weaknesses. You find other people in the team who can cover for them. And we all know this, without getting too personal about our churches. There are some leaders of churches who aren't really leaders. They're pastors. They're great at caring for people, but they might not have a leadership gift. But that's okay, providing they bring a leader alongside them to work with them. Or you might have someone who's great at leadership, but they're not really very pastoral. And that's okay, providing that weakness is covered for by having someone else in the team. Does that make sense? And so in this book, they talk about 4 things. So when we select someone, we're selecting for talent, not simply experience, intelligence, and determination. We're looking at what can this person bring to this team. That when it comes to setting expectations, we define the right outcomes, not the right steps. And what I mean by this is, if you give someone a job to do, be clear about the outcome of that job. What are you looking for? But allow them to do it within the gifts and talents that God has given them, which might be a different way than you would do. Does that make sense? As long as the outcome is the same, that's what really matters. But people do things differently. And so we're not trying to create mini-me's. You're not trying to create leaders who would do everything like you. It's about recognizing that everyone is different, and how can they achieve the same aim, but in accordance with the gifts that they have got. When motivating someone, we focus on strengths, not on weaknesses. So we say, look, wow, this is really something that you're great at. And so go for it. We want to fan this into flame. That's what the Apostle Paul says to Timothy, doesn't he? He says, fan into flame the gifts that God has given you. He doesn't say, mate, you need to fix your weaknesses because you're really rubbish. Okay, he doesn't say that. He says the gifts that God has given you, your teaching gift and your leadership gift, fan that into flame, invest in that, read books, go to conferences, hang out with other leaders who do the same, come to Fuel training evenings, do whatever you need to do to grow the gifts that God has given you. And that when we develop people, we help them find the right fit, not simply the next rung on the ladder. I don't know if you're familiar with the what's called the Peter Principle. And the Peter Principle is where you promote someone to the level of their incompetence. So you've got someone who's doing really, really well in a particular job, and you think, well, the obvious next step is that we'll promote them up the kind of management chain. And they're rubbish managers. They were brilliant at this, but then you put them into a role that actually they can't do. And so what this is saying, within someone's role, how do we create other development steps for people? Which could be about reproducing others. And so you could get someone who's really good at teaching, and you fan that into flame and they're growing in their teaching gift. And the next thing that's going to stretch them is for them to help others become really good at teaching. And that's their next development step, rather than saying, you're a great teacher, now we're going to make you the leader of the group. And I'm sure we've all experienced in our own youth groups or children's groups, people who really thrived in a particular role, and sometimes then we gave them another role and they're not doing so well at that. And it stresses them and it causes them anxiety, because our kind of world in industry says that, well, the only way is up. And sometimes it isn't. It might be across or in a different way. So leaders with competence. And then the final C is leaders with commitment or consistency. And so in all of these things, if we kind of check the character box, is this person teachable? Are they humble? Are they willing to learn? You know, none of us like to be criticised. None of us like someone coming alongside us saying, "Oh, you're not doing that very well." This morning I met with a lady who's my coach, and wow, she asked me some tough questions. And in fact, I had a really tough meeting with her this morning. It was brilliant, but she texted me even later to say, "Are you okay? Was I too hard on you?" And I was just like, "No, I'm all right. I'm all right." But actually, I want to grow. I want to be a better leader. And I'm so blessed to have Jill in my life who really challenges me and shows me my blind spot. I want to be teachable and grow and be willing to take the challenge, because I know my motive is that, I know her motive is she wants the very best for me. She wants the very best. We got some of our brilliant emerging leaders here this evening, which is fantastic. And sometimes we have to challenge these guys, but we do it because we love them and we care for them and we want them to be brilliant. Not because we take any joy at all in telling them they did something wrong, Well, okay, we take a little bit of joy in it, but not at all. I'm kidding. No, I'm kidding. So a commitment to ongoing character development when we think about commitment. A commitment to carry the vision even more, to keep carrying. Not to say, well, I'll do this for 2 or 3 months and then I'll bottle it and kind of clear off. Not that. So a commitment to working harder at relationships. Relationships are really tough sometimes. They can be really difficult. And, Paul talks, the Apostle Paul talks about striving to keep the unity. And so we're talking about people who will keep short accounts with each other. And, if they knock each other off, that they'll resolve it and deal with it and forgive each other. So commitment to chemistry, commitment to develop their competence. That, in a year's time, there'd be even better leaders thriving and succeeding and soaring and helping others to do the same. And, of course, practical commitment. Are you there? Are you there on time? Are you there regularly? Have you got your preparation right? All of this stuff. I think you put all of these things together, then you get a great team. But it really takes hard work to do it. And the final thing I say, just before we've got a few minutes for questions, is that in this we want to start as young as possible. Just getting people involved in this as young as possible. I grew up in a Christian home. Some of you know that, and so I kind of always believed in the Jesus thing. And I remember as a child, praying a prayer on the windowsill of my upstairs bedroom with my mum. But in truth, my revolution in faith, my passionate pursuit of following Jesus didn't happen until I was 17 years old. When someone said to me 26 years ago, you do the maths, I'm 32, 26 years ago, someone said to me, "Matt, we would love you to be a leader, an emerging leader in the youth program of this church." And that's when the revolution in my faith happened, because I went from this turning up at church faith to this doing faith, to coming alongside a bunch of young people that as a 17-year-old I felt completely ill-equipped for dealing with some of the stuff that was going on in their lives. And so it drove me to my knees in prayer. I suddenly realised that this dusty old book called the Bible actually had answers to some of the questions that they had. And it just revolutionised my relationship with God, which is why I am so passionate for young people and children as early as possible to start taking leadership responsibilities. Of course, we've still got radar for this stuff. We still want to challenge on character. You know, we still want to encourage them to carry. We still want to encourage them to develop chemistry as a team. We still want to identify the gifts that God has given them, and we want to call them up to commitment right from the earliest stage. And by doing that, hopefully we'll grow them and develop them. And the dream always is that they will go even further than we have ever done. One of my great joys, and I'll finish with this and we've got a couple of minutes for questions, is years and years ago there was a young lady in our youth group, and and myself and a couple of the team, we were involved in her faith journey, which was great. And I was the youth pastor of the church as a volunteer, and then she came through the church and really started to go for it with God. And she did a year out with us as a church, and she did a degree in youth ministry, and then she became the youth pastor of this church for 4 or 5 years, and now she's my boss. And I'm talking about Claire Murphy, who's here this evening, because she's the chairman of Urban Saints. And Lisa Crusade. She's the chairman of Urban Saints, and that's an absolute joy to see this young person who was in my youth group come, and now I work for her. And that's got to be our aspiration, hasn't it? That we see children, young people come all the way through. It makes me feel a little bit old, but come all the way through and doing even greater things that we could ever do. So, a couple of minutes, and by my clock. Any questions, any comments, any things that people want to ask in response to that? Yeah.
I find a difficulty. We've got quite a good team of people who want to help out on the Sunday schools and areas, but just the time commitment is the biggest thing. So no one particularly seems willing to take on more because time, and they're not. In general, a lot of people have other commitments on Sundays, etc. So kind of how do you try and grow those leaders and get them to take on maybe more of, grow their strengths when you're struggling to get them to
absolutely
commit.
Yeah, great. I would say 2 things on that, and I think that is a real challenge for most churches actually. So I think sometimes people feel intimidated by a bigger responsibility, and you kind of alluded to it. So I think sometimes we need to say, could you do that? Could you do a little bit more? And they build confidence in that, and then you ask them to stretch and do a little bit more. So they build confidence step by step to start to take on the responsibility. And so, maybe give them something really small to do that they could achieve that will give them some success that they would dare to do more after that. I think after trying to do that for some months, if you're still not finding anyone really stepping up, then I would personally be courageous enough to say this thing is going to stop unless someone steps up, because I genuinely don't believe that it is God's will or right for a single man or woman to carry the load by themselves. And so sometimes we do have to be that strong and say this is not going to happen. I cannot do this alone. And if we see people in the scriptural record who have visitations from God personally saying that, then how much more you and I sometimes need to. And I think the difficult thing on that is because we think, what if it stops, and that's a really bad thing. And sometimes it might need to, for people really to be challenged. Ultimately, we're on God, aren't we? And Jesus says, pray to the Lord of the harvest for more workers to the harvest field. So hope that helps. One more question, last minute. Yeah.
Is there a way of putting, I've been trying to get some teenagers on church leadership teams. How do you do that and protect them from like a kind of barrage of politics and that kind of thing? Is there a way of doing it without breaking them?
Yeah, that's a great question. That is a really good question, actually. Again, I would say slowly, steadily. I mean, these guys here that we have, some of the emerging leaders, they're involved in, these guys are involved in our Friday night group, but we have other young people involved in other children's groups, we have young people involved in the children's teams, and we're kind of journeying on that. You know, my aspiration is that in the kind of bi-monthly leadership gatherings we have of all of the key leaders together, that the young people eventually will be part of that and their voice will be heard in that. And I'm aware, and it's a little bit easier for me because I'm the senior pastor, that the leader sets the culture. And so I have to take some responsibility to set a culture that their voice is heard. And if I wasn't the senior pastor, then I would try to set a culture where I have influence. And if I felt it would be damaging for them to be in other spheres, then I wouldn't put them under that until I thought that would change. Great question. Brilliant. Thanks very much for listening. You've got about 5 minutes to move on to the next.